Okay, I'm thinking probably let's get started if that's okay. We've got a bit of housekeeping to go anyway, so hopefully a few more people will join us as we go through that. Firstly, good afternoon, everyone. Massive thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name's Abby Hall. I'm one of the Devon AHP faculty leads, and welcome to the last in our webinar series today. Today's focus is very much on supervisors and managers and how they can support workers, and particularly around kind of career development, career conversations, in specific relation to the HEE support worker career competency education and career development framework. I'm really delighted to invite Annie to present today. I'm going to let her go through and just introduce herself shortly. Just before we get cracking, just a few bits of housekeeping. I think we're probably all used to these by now, but if you're happy to remain muted unless you're speaking, that would be absolutely great. There's going to be loads of opportunities for questions throughout the webinar and afterwards, so obviously when you're speaking, just unmute yourself. Feel free to raise your hand to ask any questions or pop it in the chat. Annie's quite happy that if there's something particularly comes up that you want to ask there and then pop it in the chat, and then I'll direct it through to Annie as we go. We are recording the session, so I've just typed in the chat that we're recording the session and it's going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So if you go onto YouTube and search for Devon AHP faculty, all of our webinars will be there, so you can access them whenever you'd like to. Other than that, if you haven't introduced yourself in the chat, that would be absolutely lovely. Please just do. It's just really nice to get an idea of who's in the room. Just a reminder really of the webinars that we've had. So these are all the webinars that we've had so far. So today is the final one for now. We might have a few more coming up, but that's the last planned one for the moment. And they are, as I said, all on our YouTube channel. So you can either scan that QR code or just go to YouTube and just search for Devon AHP faculty and they'll all come up. I will send the slides around afterwards. So if you want a link to it, we can send that through. I think that's me. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to hand over to Annie to let her introduce herself. Over to you, Annie.
Thanks, Abby. Just a sound check. Can you all hear me? I'll take that as a yes. While I'm presenting, I can't see people. So if you do have a question, please just, as Abby said, put it in the chat. Abby will be monitoring the chat so she can feed me the questions as you ask them, or otherwise I won't be able to see your hand up. So please just voice your question, and I'm very, very happy to answer those both as I go and also at the end of the session. So first of all, thank you for inviting me along to talk about career guidance conversations. This is something which is very dear to my heart, and I'll take you through the format of today's webinar and also just give you a little bit of background information. So if we look at introduction and background, I was interested to know in the wider world, what sort of impact do career conversations have? So they can be career guidance conversations, they can be specific, they can be general. And I found this study by Right Management Global Career, and it's a career conversation study that took place in 2016, and they questioned people in hundreds of different organisations, and these were their findings. And it just goes to demonstrate that if we had these conversations, their impact is long lasting. People feel more engaged, they feel more confident and more likely to share their ideas. They're more likely to look for opportunities and growth with their current employer, and they'd be more likely to stay with their current employer. And we know that as well as everything else that's going on, we also have some retention issues across our health and social care systems as well. So what we're doing today is not just talking about individual career guidance conversations, we're talking about the difference these make to our teams, to our team members, and how much it increases their sense of feeling valued and supported. So we've already said hellos, and we're going to look at in today's webinar at how to have a career guidance conversation, and we will be referencing the framework that Abby mentioned, and it's a particularly useful guide, I think, because it gives you a very clear steer if you're looking for the education pathway, if you're looking for a potential career pathway, and it gives you insight into where you would be needing to focus your effort in order to be able to get from your A to your B. What we'll cover in the next hour, and I've got my, I am clock watching so I don't run over and leave plenty of time for questions. We're going to define what a career conversation is, a career guidance conversation. We're going to look at how you plan a conversation and how you have one of those conversations with a member of your team. And then I'm going to provide a small template, a very simple template for you to use. Like all templates, it's entirely your choice whether you use it or not, but it's a helpful starter for 10. So just pausing to draw breath there. We'll continue. So a little bit of background context. We know how vital the support worker as a staff group are to improving service delivery, for that transformation, and for us introducing new models of care. And we know, therefore, that Health Education England have been instrumental in publishing this framework, and it's there to support you and the teams that you manage. It's going to help us to ensure clear and consistent access to this high quality learning and this career progression. And this is something of a really hot topic across the health and social care sector at the moment. Career conversations are a key part of that framework, because how can we direct somebody? How can we support somebody if we don't know what their motivations are, if we don't know what they feel they're capable of? How can we possibly help them on their growth trajectory? And finally, the framework helps progression, and it can guide you into that pre-registration level if that is what your teams are interested in doing. A little bit of background information on the Devon retention project. So at the moment, there is a retention project going on, being led by a team at Torbay and South Devon NHS Foundation Trust, of which I am one. And we've done a large amount of research, and what it's boiled down to is that people are telling us that these are the 4 things that make a difference to them staying with their organisation or being more likely to stay with their organisation. One is feeling valued and recognised, and that's we've heard that time and time again, those themes coming up again from our support worker colleagues, from our nursing workforce colleagues, from our AHP workforce colleagues. A supportive manager makes a massive difference, and there is a saying that people join organisations and leave managers. So the supportive manager element of the manager and supervisor role becomes incredibly important. People are looking for career and progression and development opportunities, because that is what is going to make them feel plugged into their organisation and wanting to progress further, either in their role or further forward. And what we've also been told loudly and clearly is that good work-home balance / flexible working, this is also really important. In career guidance conversations, support all of these drivers. So they are really good, useful, helpful conversations to have. So if we look now at the purpose of a career guidance conversation, we can see that there are really important reasons why having them is good. And the first is that they enable people to see that there is a career pathway for them. So people can see that there is a future for them in their organisation. There's something they can be aspirational about. You, as me, as a manager and a supervisor, what we do through a career guidance conversation is we help the person recognise their own role in driving forward their own career. And this is really important, because it's never a case that I sit back and I expect my career progression to be done to me or done for me. It's about people understanding that they have a role in that, and that it's really important that they can feel active and proactive. That then gives us a neat segue into the third bullet point, which is that the purpose of a career guidance conversation is for the individual to be able to have accountability for their own progression, for mastering new skills, for becoming more competent, for building up their skills and expertise. And in this financially really challenged time, that also brings an opportunity for increasing earning potential. So there's a real added benefit to helping people work out what's important to them, where they want to go, and then helping them set out on that path. Another really important thing for a career guidance conversation, and we found this very recently with some career coaching that we've been doing as part of the retention project, is enabling people to identify what's important to them in their career, which isn't just linked to work. It's also linked to their own health and well-being and their own work-home balance. And why this is important is because these factors may change over time. And if I can use a theoretical example, it may be that at a given point in somebody's life, they say, at the moment, I've got really important caring responsibilities. It might be a young child or children, it might be a relative, but I've got really important caring responsibilities at home. Therefore, flexibility is really important to me, and I value that. And then a really exciting job comes up, and it's asking you to do 12-hour shifts. Immediately, it's important to apply your principles.
Coding to begin to do now. I can't remember what it's called now.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I think someone wasn't muted, Annie, so I've just muted them. Okay. I think it was just an accident.
No problem, no problem. So it's understanding what's important to us at the point in our lives where we're having these career conversations, because these factors may change for us over time. And finally, the purpose of a conversation is to build confidence, to have the conversations, and also to build the levels of trust that something will happen as a result of them, because that's really important. If we have the conversation and then nothing happens, it decreases the value and the perceived purpose of a career guidance conversation. Just persuading my machine, there we go, to move on to the next slide. So a little bit of a question for you now to get your thinking caps on. What words would you use to define a career guidance conversation? And I think, Abby, you've put a form up, haven't you, for people to complete. So just take a couple of minutes and just think, what words would you use to define a career guidance conversation? Is it a chat? Is it supportive? Is it directive? What are the words that come to your mind when you think about this kind of conversation? And then we'll have a look and see what your shared thoughts are in the group. Abby, will I need to come off share to see this?
You should be able to see it. Is it not showing?
I can see people thinking.
I'll once we've got a few more, then I can share them all. Let's give it a couple more minutes. We've had quite a lot of responses, but a couple more minutes and then I'll share it with everyone.
I can hear the thinking in the virtual room. It's fantastic.
Should be sharing now. Can you see them? Responses?
Not yet.
Can you see that, Annie, or not?
I can see 3 responses.
Okay, there's quite a lot of responses.
Which are mine? Yes.
We've got things like productive, supportive, chat, exploring, joint discussion, goal setting, encouragement, identifying strengths, forward-looking, support worker, motivating, productive, exploratory, informal, coaching, guidance, supportive, ongoing conversations, two-way chat, individualized, mentoring. I think that's probably all of them. I've gone round in a big circle. I think that's all of them.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Abby. So we go back to the slides. A lot of those words actually are echoed in the definition. So it absolutely is a discussion. It absolutely is two-way. It can take place between a manager or supervisor and his or her team member, but it could also be with a mentor, for example, if that was where you went for your career guidance. It absolutely is about exploring strengths. It's about looking forward. So the main focus is to help the individual to really get clear on their goals. And that is by exploring their strengths and their motivations. It is about absolutely looking at how they want to develop and what their interests are in the context of their current and future career aspirations. And that development might be within their existing role, or it might be looking and mapping their career pathway for the next 3 to 5 years. And it provides opportunities to explore and set out a rich and a rewarding career pathway. So all of those words like productive, like supportive, that's absolutely the spirit that these conversations take place in. And they are a form of mentoring, particularly because you as a manager or a supervisor, you might be used as a sounding board. Your team member may come in and they have an idea and they want to explore it with you. And that's really valuable to have the space and time to do that. And it's an opportunity for reflection, which is really important. One thing I did want to do was just to make a distinction between a career guidance conversation or range of conversations as opposed to a performance appraisal. So we know that a performance appraisal, you may call it a PDR, we call it an achievement review in our trust. That's to look at past performance and it's identify strengths and plan for future performance. And that can certainly be a stepping stone in your career guidance conversations. But I think a career conversation, a guidance conversation, it looks at it goes out further than just the year. It looks at what future growth is going to be like for that person over a longer period of time. And it's a coaching conversation, which a performance appraisal is too. It's a coaching conversation with great questions, lots of listening and open discussion. So there's real aspiration, forward-looking, motivation, hopefulness about a career guidance conversation. The format is important, and I suppose the number of career guidance conversations that you have with individual team members, in some ways it's a conversation that is ongoing through your working relationship together with your team. But it might be a single session or it might run over several sessions. And I've put as an example there a time frame of an hour. That is an example of a time that you might take. It's a good chunk of time. And what it enables the person to do, and for us to do with the person we're having the guidance conversation with, is to explore and understand their motivations. Because that is what comes from deep within us is going to drive the direction that we travel in, and understanding that's really key to providing a mapping out for ourselves and helping someone else to map out a clear pathway. The second bit is, what are that person's dreams? What are they reflecting? What's their end goal? Where do they see themselves? And it's important because a career guidance conversation does need to be leading somebody, directing somebody, taking somebody towards something that they've identified that is important to them. Otherwise, it can be a lovely discussion, a lovely chat, but it is open-ended, and the purpose is the chat as opposed to defining what the end goal is and a possible pathway to reach that. And then what comes off the back of that is what I've put as a short-term intentional plan. So it doesn't have to be huge on detail, but what it is a way of identifying the stepping stones to reach whatever that end goal is for the person who is in that career guidance conversation with you. And I did want to put at the bottom, because in my own experience of having career guidance conversations as a manager, as a mentor, as a coach, sometimes as a result of the conversations, people will leave. But this is because what the guidance conversation has helped them do is clarify that actually their future career pathway isn't where they are. It isn't where they are at the moment, and this has been really helpful in helping them to do that. And certainly in those experiences, in those cases, the individual has left the organisation in a positive way. Their exit's been positive, and they feel supported to go on and explore more broadly what their career conversation, what their career pathway will be. So I felt it really important to put that somebody leaving does not mean that the conversation hasn't been positive. It could mean the opposite. Okay, so now in this section, we're going to move on to the role of each person. And this is important because, as people have rightly already identified, there's a listening role, there's a discussion role, that there may be actions that both people go away with. So Abby's going to put a couple more forms up, and I'd love your thoughts on what do you think is the role of the manager or supervisor in the career conversation? And what do you think is the role of the individual in that process?
Annie,
So we'll do the supervisor first.
I think if you look in chat, Annie, you'll be able to see there's an option to click on more, which should show it to you as well.
Oh, brilliant.
To everyone
Thank
else.
you. Some good stuff coming through here. So just thinking about the role of the manager and the supervisor in this. Really good stuff here. Absolutely. The supportive aspect, the discussion being open and honest, the realism, the reality about what the individual may be able to achieve versus the opportunities that are open to them. Some really good stuff there. Active listening, absolutely. That's the bedrock of all good coaching. Any kind of coaching or mentoring conversation. And that time to reflect, which we so seldom have in our current operating environment. So absolutely, the airtime is with the individual in the conversation. That's great. Constructive, positive, absolutely. Forward focused. Thinking about where they want to be, taking into account all of the elements of their life and their work that they're balancing. All of that. That's great. Thanks, Abby. Do we have one as well for the role of the manager and the supervisor?
Oh, I think that was the manager and the supervisor, wasn't it? We've got the one for about what's the role of the support worker.
Okay. There we go. Thank you to whoever put that. You've saved us all a lot of time. That's great. So there's a real shared appreciation within this within the group about the skills and the approach and the attitude and the qualities that form the backdrop to having a really good career guidance conversation. The coming ready, having thought things through, coming with some ideas, being open, being honest, being constructive, really listening, asking questions to make the person think, all really strong and important factors for the people who are having the conversations. It's great. Team working, absolutely. Yeah. And having had conversations with both being on the receiving end of career guidance conversations and having career guidance conversations with members of the teams that I've been that I've managed in the past and now, it is such a valuable thing to be able to have that time with your manager, to be able to think our thoughts out loud. And there is a way that helps us to make sense of what those thoughts are and go forward. But in terms of feeling valued and appreciated, it's a really significant thing. Abby, there's a question that's come in the chat from Jill, which says, where can we see all the responses?
I've just replied to it in the chat, actually.
Oh, right.
If in the chat where you see the poll, if you click the more button,
yeah,
that should open up all the responses.
That's great. Okay, there you go, Jill. You can see them in the round. Okay, so I'm going to pick up then on our discussion, and thank you for all those encouraging words and those important ways that you think the role of the manager, supervisor and the individual plays out in the career guidance conversation. And we've got a little bit of thought here. So one of the things, one of the images I love is of the manager and the supervisor as a little bit as a gardener, and the responsibility is to tend to the people in the team, to support them to grow and to achieve their potential. So that growth is all about forward-looking, about individualized approaches to each member of the team, taking into consideration where they are, what their aspirations are, what their skills are, what their levels of confidence are, how they see themselves progressing. So having those career guidance conversations can help us to really understand each member of our team and what their aspirations are, and understand where they are on their own journey, as it were. Their role, and a lot of this was picked up, is to be a sounding board, a source of support, and also a source of challenge. There were terms like realistic and reality in those forms those word clouds that we were building, and that's absolutely right. And that's not to curb somebody's aspirations, it's to help them be more likely to achieve them. And what managers and supervisors can also do is they can really empower employees to see themselves as their own career owners and encourage them on that basis to really go out and find out for themselves what they're capable of. So those are some of the things around the role of the manager. And then if we think about the role of the individual, some of this we've already touched on, but it does bear repeating. So one of the things is taking ownership and responsibility for their career development. And it isn't something that's done to me or for me, as I've said before, it's something which I take an active interest and part in. It helps me, if I'm having a career coaching conversation with my line manager, to identify what's important to me at work, what matters to me, and what therefore can I not ignore when I'm making decisions and choices about where I want to go next in my career. It's really helpful to be self-aware. So what kind of feedback have I had about my strengths? What kind of understanding do I have of areas where I could develop and strengthen further? And am I clear about what my areas of interest are? Is it just a blank canvas, or do I have a really clear feeling and have thought about where I want to go next? It gives the individual time, but it's also about us taking the time to think and work out this direction of travel and what the end goal is for that particular time frame. So that might be, you might be talking 12 months, you might be talking 3 years, or somebody may say, I've already thought about what I want to be doing over the next 10 years. And to remember that these conversations are not typecasting somebody for the rest of their career. These conversations, the end goals that they're describing, are only a point in time. And hopefully these career guidance conversations, if not with you, with other managers in the future, will be an ongoing part of each and every person's work experience. We've looked at the definition then of career guidance conversation, so we know what its purpose is. And you've shared your thoughts, thank you. And we've looked at the role of the manager or supervisor and the individual. So let's think now about how we plan for and how we hold a career conversation. Some of this will be very obvious, but it does bear repeating because it's important that for a conversation like this, you have solitude, so a place where you can talk uninterrupted, a place where someone feels safe to be able to have those conversations. So we're going to look now at planning a conversation. Quick question then, so back to the form. What sources of information can a manager or supervisor use to help them to plan a career guidance conversation with members of their team? So what's available to you already that you could go to get a bit of a head start on helping to plan that career guidance conversation that you're going to have? Absolutely, appraisals are really good, a really good source of support because it can give you recent data on where that person is and what they're interested in and what their aspirations are. SWOT analysis, I love some of this. Registered bodies, absolutely, they'll have those pathways mapped out, plus the skills and experience required. Picking up on previous conversations, vocational information, absolutely right. Where does your trust have information on potential career pathways? Who would provide that? Who would your team member be able to go and talk to specifically about wanting to work in orthotics or finding out how to become a radiographer, for example? Experts within the team. Brilliant, so some good ideas coming through there. So it just shows, doesn't it, how when we think about it, how much there is actually available that we could go to help us begin to frame that career guidance conversation with a member of our team. Specialist frameworks, absolutely. So there's lots in the wider sphere, specialist frameworks, registered bodies, external training, right down to sources of support within our immediate environment, like clinical experts, like talking to a supervisor, getting previous appraisal documentation. That's great. Thanks very much for that, everyone. So I'm going to whiz back to the slides. And you were much more fruitful than me in your suggestions. But I was thinking, we've got appraisal documentation. Are there any notes from any previous one-to-ones where career development's been discussed? Has any existing career mapping been done previously? Is that within the organisation or for the individual? Is that paper-based? Is it software-based? What do you know about career pathways, both inside the AHP career framework and outside? And of course, you've got the competency framework that can help you as well. But lots of really good suggestions there. Talking to other experts, looking at what's available on registered career information on registered careers, all really good suggestions. And it means a bit of time, doesn't it? It means a little bit of planning time to pull that stuff together ahead of the career guidance conversation. And I suppose a word of warning as well, just a word of caution, is we can pull some stuff together, but until we actually talk to the person, we still don't know what they're thinking. So their thinking may radically have changed, but what this does is it gives them some insight. It gives us some insight on where the person that we're having the career guidance conversation is at the moment. Okay, my machine has, there we go. So in terms of setup, it really doesn't matter where you have your career guidance conversation, as long as you can talk comfortably and openly without being interrupted. So I've had them walking with a person. We've gone outside and we've started walking because we wanted to get a bit of fresh air. In an office, in a meeting room, we've gone off site and we've met somewhere like a cafe where it's a quiet time of day. So we're going to be able to talk comfortably and openly without being interrupted. There are all kinds of places where you can go. And I was just curious, please feel free to voice this or to write it in the chat, but where might a place like this be for you? Where would you think of having your career guidance conversations? What are your thoughts on? Is there anything coming through on the chat, Abby?
There's one about in supervision, someone's popped. I guess it's about practically where might that be? Would it be in an office? Would it
physically,
be
where would it be?
In a cafe, or so more practical? So someone's popped outside. Outside can be great if the weather's good. Yeah,
absolutely agree. Not if it's howling a gale or pouring with rain.
got meeting room.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. Someone's put whichever location suits both parties, and I think that's important to say, because it needs to work for both people.
Absolutely, and that's why we put a place where you can talk. So we're not being as specific. We're simply saying actually what works for you, that both people are comfortable with, and can therefore feel that they can talk openly and comfortably.
Other suggestions like an upstairs room in a local cafe, which sounds nice. A booked quiet room where there's no interruptions. And someone else just mentioned, really, I think that's important to say, that it's quite hard to find quiet rooms within hospital settings or community settings quite often. So
exactly, and this is exactly why we've asked. This is why I put this slide in, because my own experience of trying to find quiet rooms to have conversations is it's tricky. It's tricky. So it's about knowing where those spaces are, and also, of course, checking in with the other person. In our library on site, for example, we've got some study rooms, and they're great for having quiet conversations, and they can be booked out. So have you got bookable spaces, or meeting rooms, or offices where you can meet uninterrupted.
Something else has popped, obviously with Teams, it can be from home as well, which is obviously a nice
Absolutely, it can.
alternative.
Yeah. Absolutely, it can.
I think it's very traditional that we've always kind of just used meeting rooms, or we've always met in, you know, where we work. But actually, I find it really valuable going somewhere very different. So going to a cafe or something, just it's a different atmosphere. You feel almost kind of equal the person you're having a conversation with, and it just feels very different. I think it can feel very much easier, much more relaxing. So
maybe a bit more liberating because you're off site and you're just out of the work atmosphere. Absolutely. And I think it's worth putting time and thought into that. And just a reflection for me, when I was training to be a coach, one of the things that our facilitator really stressed was you send a message about the value of the conversation, about the value of the meeting, by how much thought you've put into the preparation for it. So I should say we send a message, and that really stayed with me. And I really thought about, it made me think about where would I meet the person? I would ask them where they would want to meet, where would they feel comfortable, where would they feel that they could talk openly. And that was different times. So sometimes it was a cafe, sometimes it was at theirs, sometimes it was, you know, off-site, on-site, a whole range of different areas. But it is important to give that consideration, because the worst thing that can happen is you've got somebody keeping an eye on their emails or answering a phone call, and those are interruptions that we can live without for the time of the career guidance conversation. Thanks, everybody. That's great. So then, actually having the career conversation, if you recall on the previous slide, I had 3 of these cogs, and the first one was motivations. And on the left-hand side, there are a few, I would say, questions to start off with. Depending on your levels of experience, you may already have some really great questions that you use, and I would really invite you, if you've got questions you've used in these kinds of discussions that have really worked for you, please share them in the chat, because then we can all benefit from the kinds of questions that you've asked. But these are my starter questions, if you like, Fatel. And what you notice is they're all open questions, which really invite the person to talk. And I've tried these questions out on a couple of people that I'm managing at the moment and tweaked them a bit. But in doing this, I found things out about them that I didn't know before, which helped me to understand how they'd arrived at the point that they had. So they were quite valuable. So things like, tell me a bit about your life. What would you say have been the major pivots? So those turning points in your careers or transitions that you've made, and what was behind that? And it's extraordinary. So I had a career guidance conversation with somebody who had been going along a completely different path, and then as a result of a personal life event which had a great impact on them, they then changed and they came into healthcare, having never considered that would be their pathway before. So that was a home-based event, a life event that had caused them to have that major change of heart in terms of where they were going. And then it is so important to understand about people's motivations, because it's what drives it. It's what pushes us towards you know, certain things and makes us work for certain things. So back to those transitions. What of those transitions for the individual, what has that taught them about their motivations and what they value in work? And for the person I mentioned, it was actually moving from something that was well rewarded into healthcare, which was not so well rewarded, but in terms of higher purpose and vocational calling was really significant for them. Another important question is, what's important to you in your career? So again, we're digging around motivations, around what, you know, what needs to be in place for that person to make them feel fulfilled and like they can meet the targets that they set for themselves and become experts and specialists, and to ask them where they are now. Where are they now in that whole career journey? Are there any questions at all that have people use that have come up in the chat? Do share them, because it's really helpful for others on the webinar as takeaways for people to be able to say, oh, actually, that was really valuable for me. So if we look at then dreams, reflections and end goals, we can, and remember, these are just my starters for 10. You can use these or disregard these. It's entirely up to you. What are the person's career dreams? What would success look like for them? How would they be feeling? What would they see around them? What would they be doing? They might have 2 or 3 possible dreams, and part of the career guidance is to say, well, I'm going to set off in this direction first. So what's their vision for each, for their goal or for each of their goals, particularly if they've got more than one idea? And would it be helpful for them to do a kind of SWOT analysis? So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats analysis on each option. So what if, for example, option A might take them 3 years and option A might take them 10 years, and option B, sorry, A would take them 3 years, option B would take them 10 years. Option B is really fantastic, but is one of the things that's a turn off, the fact that it's going to take 10 years to get there. So it just helps us to really work out again and balance what's important versus what we can do now versus what we think the challenges and the obstacles are going to be. And then for the short-term intentional plan. So every plan has to start with a first step. And one of the things that a career guidance conversation can do is help people shape that first step. And that's what the short-term intentional plan can be. It's that first move. So questions that we can think about are, what do you bring to the table? What skills and qualities do you have, and what use do you want to make of these? What are the opportunities available right now for the kind of career pathway that you're describing for yourself? How much can you do? What can you do? How can you find out about your chosen options? So who can you go and talk to? This is that role of being proactive. And then one thing that again is really good coaching practice is you've had a coaching conversation, the person has been able to reflect and think, and they've come to a conclusion about what they'd like to do. It's to really encourage them to describe their next steps to you. What are they going to do? When are they going to do it? Who they're going to talk to? How are they going to do that? What's the time frame for that first activity? And then something that guarantees a follow-up and a next career guidance conversation is to agree a review date. And that review date can be your next planned conversation where you can check in with that person, how they managed to get on. And that again is really, really supportive and leaves somebody feeling valued and recognised, because we've listened and cared enough to check in with them on what their plan was. If they've been successful, they've got an opportunity to describe that, which is really great. If they have met some challenges along the way, they can talk to you about how to overcome those challenges and go forward with a little bit of renewed energy. So those are my starters for 10, which I hope will be helpful. We're coming towards the end of the webinar, and there's obviously some time for questions, but I took this quote, this bottom line quote, from a lady called Kim Scott, who was a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, American, and had started up many successful tech companies. And she moved away from all of that, and she set up an institute, a foundation called Radical Candor, and that specializes in relationships at work and talks about the importance of things like giving feedback, like having growth conversations, which is what a career guidance conversation is. And she put that the bottom line is that having career conversations with each person who reports directly to you is the only way to understand their growth trajectory. And she goes on to say that not only are these conversations crucially important to understanding how to help your people grow, but they're vital to understanding how you help them grow in a way that's relevant. So that knowledge, that checking in, that regular, renewed understanding about what motivates the people in your team gives you insight into how to help them grow, and as Kim Scott has said, to grow in a way that's relevant. And I've just included here, and the source for this is the East of England Ambulance Service NHS Trust. You may already have a very, very clear conversation or career path template that you use within your own organisation. This is one that was shared with me through the retention project, and I love it because it's so simple. And I love it because the pathway is not linear. So we know that our path can take twists and turns. And each of those points on the route can represent a stepping stone or a step or a phase. And what a person can do is they can map out roughly the things they know they have to do. So that first step might be go and find out about the education pathway that I need to understand in order to get to my next step. Or it might be go and speak to clinician X because I know that they work in the area that I'd like to find out more about. So whatever the first step is, this is a really nice and simple way of enabling them to map what it is that they want to do next. And of course, this will change and it will shift and it will be updated as they go along their pathway, they discover more about what it is that they want to do. And with your support, they begin to flesh that out into a real career plan. And I would say that a career plan equals a stay plan. And for as long as a person is interested in having their career with us, within our organisation or organisations or sector, that's a real bonus. That's a real plus. So thank you very much for coming along today, for your attention. I'm going to come off these share in a minute so that I can take your questions if you have any. I'd welcome your thoughts, I'd welcome your feedback. My email address is here on the bottom of this slide if there is anything that you would like to ask when you go away and reflect after today's session. But for now, let's hear from you.
Thanks, Annie. That was incredibly interesting and very useful. Thank you. Has anyone got any comments, any questions? You're welcome to. It'd be lovely to raise your hand and to speak, or pop something in the chat if you'd like to. We've got a little bit of time, so it'd be good to make use of Annie while we've got her here with us.
I shall keep an eye on the chat in case any of you are very nimble-fingered. Are any of you going into this for the first time?
Peter.
Hi, Annie. I'm not going
Peter.
into this for the first time. I've just got a different question, I'm afraid to say. And that was to say, how do you manage situations where the job conversation may come round to something that the trust is unable to provide or doesn't fit with the thing? Because often people will come up with, I really want to be a band 4, but they maybe haven't got the educational requirements, or it just doesn't fit what that service needs. So do you have any advice on how you deal with that conflict between service need and individual wish?
I think the first thing I'd take you to is how important it is to be very honest and transparent about what the service need is and how that might inform the person's plan, and it might change it slightly. And that could go one of two ways. It could either they could either say, OK, so I'm going to change it slightly because it's important to me to stay here. I like it here. It's important to me to stay within the service. Or they might say, well, then this is not for me. So the first thing is to be open and transparent, I think, about what is and isn't possible. And I think then your further discussion will come from that, because I can't promise a band 4 role that isn't there, you know, or I can't promise a career pathway that we haven't yet developed within our organisation. So I won't do that. But what I might do is I might try and help them find the closest thing that maps to what they want to do. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I certainly think sometimes people try and keep hold of their staff as their staff and actually forget that essentially, as long as people stay within the NHS, we haven't really lost anyone.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And in fact, what's coming through the retention project loud and clear is if someone leaves my trust, but they've stayed in the system and they're still making a contribution, and they've found something rewarding and worthwhile. I may miss them, but I'm really glad they've gone on to do that. I suppose my bigger concern would be if someone, for example, left the NHS altogether because they just couldn't, they just hadn't found what they'd wanted. But you're right, being a really good career guidance conversations, if we're doing that as managers, it's really important that we are open to the fact that in supporting somebody, we may actually be supporting them out of our team, and to do that open-handedly and helpfully, because that's what's best for them. Thank you.
Something I was just thinking about, Annie, I think I'm just reflecting really, and probably a bit guilty of, is I tend to help people think, I tend to think shorter term. So perhaps what their next career objective is, and perhaps what I've been guilty of is not thinking actually what's the end goal they want to get to. Is that something that people commonly kind of make a mistake doing?
I think what we do is we take our cue from the person that we're having the conversation with. So they might be interested in something which is going to take them 3 years to qualify for, and fine. So that's a longer period of time. Certainly, I think it's helpful to encourage people to develop the skill of thinking ahead more than 12 months, because the idea of a career pathway is that it's longer term. So we're looking at that 3 to 5 year time frame. So yeah, we're looking up a bit further, aren't we? We're looking a bit further ahead than just round the next bend. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I would just say, in response to Keita's question, is that I have had experience of trying to hold on to somebody, and I was not a good manager in that. I was not a good manager supervisor in that instance. And when they eventually left, I went and found them and said, I realised that you really wanted to go, and I tried to hold on to you, and that was not good manager, that was not good supervisor practice. And that felt quite empowering, although it's difficult to look at yourself and go, that was not a good move on my part.
Any other questions? Anyone want to put their hand up to ask anything or pop anything in the chat?
Just looking to see whether there was some.
Johnny's just put that appraisal paperwork doesn't always help with longer term career plans, and I think that's a really good point, because it's rare in appraisal paperwork that you see that long term, that really long term kind of ambition.
And actually, Donny, we've introduced a question into our appraisal paperwork at Torbay South Devon, which is asking about people's longer term career aspirations. And my experience of that is that people haven't always thought beyond that, because they haven't been asked the question before, and they may not have thought about it for themselves. But career pathways are always, first of all, they're always developing, and they may be changing as well. And new career pathways come into being all the time. And I think what appraisal does is it makes us focus on the next 12 months. So that might be a stepping stone, but it's certainly not the whole career pathway.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Someone else just popped in the chat that it can be hard when someone has reached the ceiling of a band or band 4 role, but I think that applies to lots of bands, doesn't it?
It does, and I think at that point, you know, that may be one of those make or break points when you may be looking in terms of furthering your career in your chosen pathway. You may be looking at moving into a different area, or you may be looking at moving to a different organisation altogether. And we're running some career coaching pilots as part of the retention project. And one of the things that we have done is we've asked people to map their career pathways, and then we've shown them either the thing that matches it perfectly or the thing that most closely matches it that's available right now in our trust. And for some people, a lot of the time that's really good, because it still gets them to where they want. But for a couple, it will mean that they have an important decision, because they may not find what they want where they are.
Thank you. Any further questions? Got a question from Hannah. Band 4 may be able to access apprenticeships like top up or OT apprenticeships. So yeah, but those sort of pathways are now becoming available. So
and those apprenticeship pathways are such a gift because we have a levy, don't we? We have a significant amount to spend, and we can really begin to invest in encouraging people to take apprenticeship pathways. And with apprenticeships, you can also, of course, do other qualifications that are embedded in as part of the apprenticeship. So that's something we're seeing emerging too.
I think the plan will be to do a webinar based around apprenticeships. I thought this was going to be the last in the series, but I think a few people have highlighted actually more information about apprenticeships would be really useful. So I think we might be looking at a webinar coming up soon about apprenticeships in the Southwest.
I think that would be great. And one of the things that you can do is you can produce almost like a heat map of where you're using your apprenticeships most within clinical and non-clinical practice, and then also looking at where strategically you can encourage people and offer development in particular service areas where you know that you really want to develop and have a homegrown, skilled and expert workforce. I see a hand. Hi, Joe.
Yeah, I'm just sort of pondering, really, sitting here, and can we think of career development not just in terms of onwards and upwards, but just becoming more fulfilling? I mean, think of myself personally. I'm sort of band 6, and I'm not at the top of band 6 yet, but I don't want to be a band 7. I don't want to spend my life in meetings. But I want to develop myself, and I think it's the same for our support workers as well. Maybe they don't want to be, a qualified professional, but they want a fuller experience of being a band 3. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
And that's something I suppose I particularly want to try and work out how to do for our support workers on our team, is how do we make being a band 3 support worker the best possible and the fullest and most exciting possible without having to go onwards and upwards.
You're absolutely right. So for some people, progression will feel linear, won't it? They'll want to do that onwards and upwards. And for others, they will want to say exactly as you have, how can I get breadth and depth and expertise where I am? Because I love it here, and because I, for all sorts of reasons, want to stay where I am. And that might be forever, it might be for this period of time. So you're right, that's extremely important. And that, again, that reminds me of some retention project feedback we had, Joe, which was that actually, as a healthcare support worker, for example, I want to be valued for the role I'm in, and value the role I'm in, and not just see it as a stepping stone to something else. So you are quite right, and it's an important point to raise, this sense of being able to have breadth. Development is about breadth as well as about going up, or even zigzagging sideways into another service. Absolutely.
I think it's an important thing to say about the framework, is the framework isn't designed to force people to develop and progress up the banding. It's there as an opportunity if people want to. And I think that's a really important thing to emphasise, that it's not something that people have to follow. They don't have to go from band 2, band 3, band 4. That's not the purpose of it. It's for people that want to progress up the banding and then look to whether they want to become registered as well. So it's not a kind of a battering ram that forces people to do something they don't want to do.
And I think, Joe, the other reason you've raised such an important point is if we go back to the very beginning of, say, your first career guidance conversation that you have with somebody in your team, it's picking up on where they are, isn't it? Where are they and what's important to them? And if we do that, I think everything else will flow naturally, because we'll find out then whether they see themselves as getting to chief exec in 5 years, or whether they see themselves as really wanting to become fully expert in every facet of the role that they're in.
I think a good point for Marie in the chat is that not everyone wants to progress, but actually people also want the opportunity to be able to develop their skills either within their role or necessary to move sideways. I think that's a really key point as well.
Absolutely. And I think what it's helpful to do is to think of a career pathway as just a great big open space, and therefore your dotted line can go anywhere. and it might go sharply off to the right, it might go back a bit, and then it might go forward. It's entirely based on, you build the pathway around the individual you have the conversation with, I think.
Got a bit more time. If anyone's got any further questions, as I said, pop it in the chat or just raise your hand. Not sure if anyone's got anything further to ask.
I think there are a couple of lots of thumbs up to Jill's given us a thumbs up in general. Good, thank you. But I think that's a really good point, Jo, that you brought into the general discussion, which is this. It's about rounded development. It's about rounded and it can also be the case that you recognise that you have someone in your team who's hugely talented, and what you want for them is for them to go as far as possible, but what they want for themselves may be completely different. And it's recognising that and stepping back and saying, this isn't a conversation about me and my aspirations for you. This is a conversation about your aspirations for yourself. So being supportive but not directive, I think, is also a really important quality to bring to a career guidance conversation and any kind of coaching conversation, to be honest. Yeah.
Super, thank you. I'm not seeing any further questions, so what I will do is I'll circulate all the slides anyway, if that's okay, Annie.
Of course, absolutely.
So people have got Annie's contact details.
We have a question. Just get to the chat.
So the question is, how do you support somebody whose circumstances might prevent them from progressing?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Was there a specific, Marie, that you were thinking of, without going into too much detail? Was there a context that you had in mind, just to help me frame my response to the question?
Might be something, if it's a bit more kind of, I'll say personal, but something you want to sort of delve into a bit. Oh, okay.
Oh, thank you. Let me just have a look at that.
A bit more of an update. So like a band 4 who might not be able to progress in terms of further education.
Okay. I think I'd be inclined with that person to really spend time checking on where they are and understanding what the blockers are. So for example, if it's that there are specific requirements that someone needs, we can address those. If it's somebody reaching the top of their band and feeling like there isn't anywhere else to go, then it might be a conversation. That might be the reality part of the conversation. So this is how they feel. This is where they are. Do they feel trapped or let's say stuck where they are? And then what's going to be really important there is a conversation about all the skill and the experience and the expertise that they've built up. How could that be transferred? What might that be transferable to? What other roles might be available with greater progression or development opportunities where they could use the skills and the expertise and the knowledge that they have built up? It's a tricky one. I think there's always a way forward, but sometimes it may mean an honest conversation and a sideways move, possibly.
I think that's also where apprenticeships come in, because apprenticeships can obviously change the way that people can learn and develop, and actually it's a paid route rather than an unpaid study route. So I think that's where apprenticeships can be absolutely vital, that people can work while learning and getting paid. It is quite a game changer. So
it is, and particularly if you're already in the organisation, everything is as it was. The difference, of course, with an apprenticeship is your 20% of the time that you spend off the job developing the skills that the apprenticeship is helping you to build.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for the questions. As I said, I'm going to circulate the slides, so you'll have Annie's email address anywhere if there's anything particularly you'd like to ask her. What I'm just going to do, just to finish up, really, I'm just going to pop a slide up that has just got a link to an anonymous feedback form, and I'm just be very massively grateful if people would be happy just to you can either go to, I'll pop it in the chat as well, but if you can go to that and just fill in the feedback, that would be really useful. It just gives us an idea of what's useful in these webinars, and really what else would be useful in the future to help you. And obviously if there's a bit of a common theme about what people want, then we can try and pop on some more webinars that would be useful.
And Abby, there's a question that's come up from Jonathan in the chat. So I just wanted to say there are some summary points from the Devon ICS project. So what I'll do, Jonathan, is I'll share those with Abby, and she can share them out with
Fantastic.
with today's attendees.
Thank you, that's great.
You could also email me. My email address is on the slide, so you're very welcome to email me if you've got any follow-up questions.
Lovely, thank you.
No problem.
I think that's probably all the questions done. So as I said, I'll forward round all the slides, and a big thank you to Annie, and a big thank you for everyone for coming. If you can fill in that feedback, that would be much appreciated. It really does help us to know what people need and what they want. So
thanks very much, everybody. It's been good to meet you virtually and hear some of your thoughts. And I feel your teams will be in good hands going forward.
Thanks
everyone. Very much. Bye.